They tried for 8 long years to have a baby, 8 years of hope turning to heartbreak, of prayers that seemed to echo into empty silence, of watching other families grow while theirs remained painfully, achingly incomplete. James and Sarah Mitchell had everything a couple could want in 1887 Wyoming territory. A thriving ranch, a beautiful home, and love that ran deeper than the mountain streams that fed their land. Everything except the one thing that would make their world whole, a child. But sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes they come in the form of a 7-year-old girl with tangled blonde hair, wearing a dress 3 sizes too big, clutching a piece of charcoal and a torn scrap of paper. Sometimes they come when you least expect them, when your heart has been broken so many times you've forgotten how to hope. This is the story of how a simple drawing changed everything. How 3 broken souls found each other in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier. How a childless couple and an orphan girl discovered that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice, about opening your heart when everything inside you says it's too dangerous to try again. You see, Sarah Mitchell had been the school teacher in Millbrook Valley for 3 years, watching other people's children learn to read and write, teaching them arithmetic and geography, while her own maternal instincts remained unfulfilled. Every evening she'd return to the ranch where James would be waiting, and they'd share the same unspoken grief that had become their constant companion. The empty nursery upstairs had become a monument to their loss, its carefully painted yellow walls and hand-carved cradle gathering dust like forgotten dreams. But on this particular autumn morning, as the first frost painted the grasslands silver and the mountains stood sharp against a crystal blue sky, neither James nor Sarah knew that their lives were about to change forever. They didn't know that a little girl named Lily was making her way toward their town, alone and afraid, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and an inexplicable gift for drawing pictures that could touch the deepest corners of a person's soul. What would you do if everything you'd ever wanted seemed impossible, and then suddenly, miraculously, it wasn't? What would you do if hope knocked on your door when you'd given up believing it existed? James and Sarah Mitchell were about to find out, and their answer would not only transform their own lives but create a family that would become legendary in the annals of Millbrook Valley. This is their story. This is how love wins, even in the hardest of times, even on the harshest frontier, even when all seems lost. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wooden floors of Dr. Harrison's office as Sarah Mitchell sat rigidly in the straight-back chair, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. Beside her, James shifted uncomfortably, his weathered rancher's hands gripping his hat brim until the leather creased under the pressure. They'd been coming to this office for 3 years now, each visit carrying a diminishing spark of hope. Each appointment another step toward a truth they weren't ready to face. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the small room like a gunshot. At 62, he'd delivered more babies in Wyoming territory than any man had a right to, but he'd also been the bearer of news that could shatter dreams with the efficiency of a well-aimed bullet. He looked down at the papers scattered across his desk, then back up at the couple who had become as familiar to him as his own reflection. "James, Sarah," he began, his voice gentle but carrying in finality that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "I've consulted with 2 colleagues in Denver, sent your test results to the best specialists in Colorado territory. I'm afraid the situation hasn't changed." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly, as if the earth had shifted beneath the foundation of the building. She'd known somewhere deep in her heart, but knowing and hearing were 2 different kinds of pain. James reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her cold fingers. "There's no chance at all?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying campfire. Dr. Harrison shook his head slowly. "The damage from the fever you had 5 years ago, Sarah, it was more extensive than we initially realized. Your reproductive system simply can't—" He trailed off, seeing the way Sarah's face had gone pale as moonlight on snow. "I'm sorry. I wish I had different news to give you." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the sounds of Millbrook Valley continued. Horses clopping down Main Street, children playing near the schoolhouse, the distant sound of hammering from the blacksmith shop. life moving forward while theirs seemed to grind to a complete halt. Sarah stood abruptly, smoothing down her blue cotton dress with shaking hands. "Thank you, doctor," she managed, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "We appreciate your honesty." But as they walked out into the bright September morning, Sarah felt as though she was moving through thick molasses. Every step seemed to require enormous effort, every breath a conscious decision. James helped her up into their wagon, his touch gentle but uncertain, as if she might break into 1,000 pieces at any moment. The ride back to the ranch passed in silence. The landscape that usually brought Sarah such joy, the rolling hills dotted with cattle, the distant mountains painted purple against the sky, the golden aspens beginning their autumn transformation, now seemed to mock her with their fertility, their ability to create and sustain life. When they reached home, Sarah walked directly to the kitchen and began preparing lunch with mechanical precision. Slice the bread, set the table, heat the soup. Normal activities that might create the illusion that this was just another ordinary day, that their world hadn't just crumbled into dust. James watched her from the doorway. This woman he'd loved since she was 17 years old. This woman who had turned his rough bachelor's house into a warm, welcoming home. He'd seen her face down angry bulls, nurse sick calves through winter nights, and stand up to the most stubborn members of the school board with unwavering determination. But he'd never seen her look so fragile, so utterly defeated. "Sarah," he said softly. She turned and he saw tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "I had names picked out," she whispered. "For 8 years I've had names picked out. Emily Rose for a girl, Thomas James for a boy, after your father." James crossed the kitchen in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against his chest, her whole body shaking with the force of grief she'd been holding back in the doctor's office, in the wagon, through all the motions of normalcy. "We could... There are other ways," James said carefully. "Adoption, maybe? There are always children who need homes." Sarah pulled back to look at him, hope flickering in her green eyes like a candle flame in the wind. "Do you think... Would that be possible? Out here?" Before James could answer, a commotion erupted outside, shouting voices, running footsteps, the sound of horses approaching fast. They pulled apart and hurried to the front window, where they could see a group of riders approaching their gate, dust clouds billowing behind them. "What in the world?" James muttered, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. In Wyoming territory, unexpected visitors could mean trouble, and lately there had been rumors of cattle rustlers in the area. But as the riders drew closer, Sarah recognized Sheriff Coleman's distinctive bay mare. "It's the sheriff," she said, wiping her eyes quickly with her apron. "And Pastor Williams. Something's happened." The 2 men dismounted at the front porch, their faces grim. Sheriff Coleman, a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much violence, removed his hat respectfully. Pastor Williams, younger and softer around the edges, clutched his black hat in nervous hands. "James, Sarah," Sheriff Coleman nodded. "Sorry to bother you folks, but we've got a situation in town." "What kind of situation?" James asked, still holding the rifle loosely at his side. "Indian raid about 20 miles north of here," the sheriff said quietly. "The Henderson family. They didn't make it, but..." He paused, glancing at Pastor Williams. "There was a survivor. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Found her hiding in the root cellar." Sarah's hand flew to her throat. The Hendersons, she'd known them, had taught their older children before they'd moved north to try their luck at a larger spread. "The children? Just the one," Pastor Williams said softly. "She's in town now at the church. Mrs. Patterson's been looking after her, but she can't keep her indefinitely. We were hoping..." "Well, you're the school teacher, Sarah. You're good with children. We thought maybe you could help us figure out what to do with her." Sarah and James exchanged a look loaded with meaning. Not 2 hours after learning they could never have children of their own, here was a child who desperately needed a family. It felt like divine intervention, or perhaps the cruelest of coincidences. "What's her name?" Sarah asked. "Lily," Sheriff Coleman replied. "Lily Henderson. Poor little thing hasn't said much since we found her. Just sits and draws pictures, with whatever she can find. Charcoal, mud, anything that'll make a mark. Something stirred in Sarah's chest, a feeling she recognized but hadn't experienced in years. Maternal instinct. "We'll come," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Right now." James looked at her with concern. "Sarah, are you sure? Today's been... Today's been the day we learned we can't have our own children," she said quietly. "Maybe it's also the day we learn we can still be parents." As they prepared to ride into town, neither Sarah nor James could have imagined that a 7-year-old girl with tangled blonde hair and a gift for drawing was about to change their lives in ways they never thought possible. They had no idea that this moment, this decision to help a traumatized child, would become the first step toward the family they'd always dreamed of. The answer to their prayers was waiting for them in a small room behind the church, armed with nothing but hope and a piece of charcoal. The wooden church doors creaked as Sarah pushed them open, the familiar scent of beeswax and old hymnal books washing over her. But today, the sanctuary that had always brought her comfort felt heavy with sorrow and uncertainty. Pastor Williams led them through the nave toward the small room behind the altar where the church stored supplies and where, apparently, a 7-year-old girl was trying to make sense of a world that had just shattered around her. Mrs. Patterson, the pastor's wife, emerged from the back room with worry etched deep in the lines around her eyes. Eleanor Patterson was a formidable woman who had raised 6 children of her own and helped deliver half the babies in Millbrook Valley. But today she looked overwhelmed, almost defeated. "Oh, Sarah, thank goodness," she whispered, pulling Sarah aside. "I've dealt with traumatized children before, but this little one, she hasn't spoken a word since Sheriff Coleman brought her in yesterday evening. Won't eat more than a few bites, won't sleep, just sits in that corner and draws." "Draws what?" Sarah asked, her teacher's instincts already engaging. In her 3 years of teaching, she'd learned that children often expressed what they couldn't say through their artwork. Mrs. Patterson shook her head, her gray curls trembling. Pictures of her family mostly. Over and over again. The same scene. Her parents, her 2 brothers who... She trailed off, glancing toward the closed door. Well, who didn't make it? Sometimes she draws other things, though. Houses, mostly. Different houses, like she's searching for something. James placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah nodded, though her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. 3 hours ago, she'd been grieving the children she'd never have. Now she was about to meet a child who desperately needed parents. The irony wasn't lost on her, and she couldn't help wondering if this was God's way of answering prayers she'd been too afraid to voice. Mrs. Patterson opened the door slowly, as if sudden movements might startle a wild animal. "Lily, sweetheart, there are some people here who'd like to meet you. This is Mrs. Mitchell. She's a teacher, like we talked about, and this is her husband, Mr. Mitchell." The sight that greeted them stopped Sarah's breath in her throat. In the corner of the small room, sitting cross-legged on a quilted blanket, was the smallest, most fragile-looking child Sarah had ever seen. Lily Henderson was all sharp angles and hollow spaces, as if grief had physically carved pieces away from her. Her blonde hair, which might have been beautiful when clean and combed, hung in tangled knots around her thin face. Her dress, a faded blue cotton that had once probably fit one of her older brothers, hung loose on her tiny frame. But it was her eyes that broke Sarah's heart completely. Those pale blue eyes held depths of sorrow that no 7-year-old should ever have to carry. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and was afraid to hope for anything ever again. Lily didn't look up when they entered. Instead, she continued working with intense concentration on whatever she was drawing, her small fingers gripping a piece of charcoal so tightly that her knuckles were white. The floor around her was covered with papers, some torn from Pastor Williams' sermon notes, others scraps that Mrs. Patterson had found, all filled with pencil and charcoal drawings. Sarah knelt down slowly, careful to stay far enough away that she wouldn't seem threatening. "Hello, Lily," she said softly. "I'm Sarah. I teach at the school here in town." No response. Lily continued drawing, her movements precise despite the crude materials she was working with. "What are you drawing there?" Sarah asked, tilting her head to try to get a better look at the paper. For just a moment, Lily's hand paused. Sarah held her breath, hoping for some sign of acknowledgement. But then the drawing resumed. James, who had been standing awkwardly by the door, surprised everyone by settling down on the floor a few feet away from Lily. His large frame looked almost comical folded up like that, but his voice when he spoke was incredibly gentle. "You know, my wife Sarah is the best teacher in all of Wyoming territory," he said conversationally, as if he were speaking to an adult rather than a traumatized child. "She taught me to read better, even though I'm 35 years old and probably should have learned properly years ago." This time, Lily definitely paused in her drawing. Her eyes flicked up just briefly to look at James, though she said nothing. "It's true," Sarah said, catching on to James's approach. "He came to me with a book about cattle ranching that he'd been struggling with, and we spent 3 evenings a week for 2 months working through it together. Best investment I ever made," James added with a slight smile. "Now I can read anything. Books, newspapers, even love letters from my wife when she was courting me." "I never wrote you love letters," Sarah protested with mock indignation. "You wrote me one," James countered. "On my birthday 2 years ago. You said I was adequate at kissing and surprisingly good at remembering anniversaries." Despite everything, Sarah felt her lips twitching toward a smile. Trust James to try to make her laugh, even in a situation like this. But more importantly, she noticed that Lily had stopped drawing entirely and was listening to their conversation with what appeared to be cautious interest. "Can I see some of your drawings, Lily?" Sarah asked gently. "I love art. I'm not very good at it myself, but I love seeing what other people create." Lily considered this for a long moment, then carefully selected one of the papers from the pile beside her and held it out. Sarah accepted it with the reverence she might show a precious document, and her breath caught when she saw what the child had created. Despite the crude materials and the obvious haste with which it had been drawn, the picture was remarkably detailed and emotionally powerful. It showed a family, 2 tall figures that were clearly adults, and 3 smaller figures between them. All 5 figures were holding hands, and above them, Lily had drawn a house with smoke curling from the chimney and what looked like a garden beside it. "This is beautiful, Lily," Sarah said, and she meant it. "Is this your family?" For the first time since they'd entered the room, Lily spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from crying and disuse, but it was definitely words. "They're gone," she said simply. The 3 adults exchanged glances loaded with meaning. Mrs. Patterson pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, and even Sheriff Coleman, who had seen more than his share of tragedies, cleared his throat roughly. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah said, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry. That must hurt very much." Lily nodded, then selected another paper from her pile. This drawing was different, simpler but somehow more hopeful. It showed just a house, similar to the one in the family picture. But this time there were flowers in the garden and what looked like a swing hanging from a tree beside it. "What about this one?" Sarah asked. Lily stared at the drawing for a long moment before answering. "It's the house where families live," she said finally, "where they're safe." James and Sarah looked at each other, and Sarah saw her own thoughts reflected in her husband's eyes. This child wasn't just drawing random pictures. She was drawing dreams, hope, the life she'd lost and the life she wished she could have. "Lily," James said carefully, "would you like to come stay with us for a while? We have a house sort of like the one in your picture. We have a garden, and there's a big oak tree where we could hang a swing if you'd like one." Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment Sarah saw a flicker of something that might have been hope. But then her expression shuddered again, and she shook her head. "People always go away," she whispered, "even when they promise they won't." The simple statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was a child who had learned at 7 years old that the world wasn't safe, that the people you loved could be taken from you without warning, without explanation. How did you convince someone so young and so hurt that love was still worth the risk? "You're right," Sarah said, surprising everyone, including herself. "People do go away sometimes, even when they don't want to, even when they promise they won't. Sometimes bad things happen that nobody can control." Lily looked up at her with something approaching surprise, as if she'd expected to be told that everything would be fine, that nothing bad would ever happen again. "But you know what I've learned?" Sarah continued, the love doesn't go away. Even when the people do, the love they gave you, the love you gave them, that stays with you forever. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find new people to love, not to replace the ones you lost, because nobody could ever do that, but to add to the love you already have. Lily studied Sarah's face intently, as if trying to determine whether this strange woman could be trusted with something as fragile as hope. Would I still be able to draw? She asked finally. Every day if you want to, Sarah promised. I'll get you proper art supplies, real pencils and paper, and maybe even some colored chalk. And would I have to forget my real family? James answered this one. Never, he said firmly. We'd make sure you always remembered them. We'd want to hear stories about them if you wanted to tell us. Lily considered this, her small fingers tracing the edges of her family drawing. Finally, she looked up at Sarah and James with those heartbreakingly old eyes. Could I think about it? She asked. Of course, Sarah said. Take all the time you need. But as they prepared to leave, Lily called out to them one more time. Mrs. Mitchell, could you maybe come back tomorrow and bring those art supplies you talked about? Sarah's heart nearly burst with hope and tenderness. I absolutely will, she promised. As they walked back toward their wagon, Sarah clutched the family drawing Lily had let her keep. She had the strangest feeling that everything in their lives was about to change, that this meeting was just the beginning of something beautiful and unexpected. She had no idea how right she was. Sarah had barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's pale blue gaze and heard that heartbreaking whisper, people always go away. She'd risen before dawn, much to James's amusement, and spent an hour going through every drawer and closet in their house, gathering anything that might serve as art supplies for a 7-year-old girl who drew her feelings instead of speaking them. By the time the general store opened at 8 o'clock, Sarah was waiting outside with a list that made store owner Mr. Hutchins raises his eyebrows in surprise. Real drawing paper, the good kind, she'd said breathlessly, and pencils. Not just regular writing pencils, but different kinds. Soft ones for shading, and colored chalk if you have any. Oh, and maybe some of that nice smooth charcoal, the kind that doesn't break easily. Mr. Hutchins, a practical man who usually dealt in requests for flour and ammunition, scratched his graying head. You planning to become an artist, Mrs. Mitchell? Something like that, Sarah had replied, unwilling to explain about Lily to anyone just yet. The little girl's story wasn't hers to tell, and she had a feeling that Lily needed privacy to heal. Now, standing outside the church at 9 o'clock sharp with a canvas bag full of art supplies, Sarah felt more nervous than she had on her first day of teaching. What if Lily had changed her mind? What if she'd retreated back into that shell of silence and wouldn't even look at the gifts Sarah had brought? Mrs. Patterson opened the door before Sarah could knock, her face brightening with relief. Oh, thank goodness you're here. She's been asking about you since sunrise. She has? Sarah's heart leaped. Every 10 minutes. Is Mrs. Mitchell coming today? Did she really mean it about the art supplies? Mrs. Patterson chuckled, though her eyes remained concerned. Poor little thing hardly slept, but she did eat some breakfast this morning. First real meal she's had since she arrived. Sarah followed Mrs. Patterson through the church to the back room, her bag of supplies feeling heavier with each step. The weight of responsibility, she realized. This child was beginning to trust her, and trust was the most precious and fragile gift a traumatized person could offer. When the door opened, Lily was exactly where she'd been the day before, cross-legged on the quilt in the corner. But this time, she looked up immediately when Sarah entered, and there was something different in her expression. Not hope exactly, but maybe the possibility of hope. Good morning, Lily, Sarah said softly, settling down on the floor again. I brought you something. Lily's eyes fixed on the canvas bag with an intensity that made Sarah's chest tight. How long had it been since this child had received a gift? How long since someone had kept a promise to her? Would you like to see? Sarah asked. Lily nodded quickly, then seemed to catch herself and nodded again more slowly, as if she were afraid to appear too eager. Sarah opened the bag and began laying out the supplies on the quilt between them. Real drawing paper, cream-colored and smooth, a set of pencils ranging from hard to soft, 3 pieces of charcoal wrapped in cloth, and finally her prize, a small wooden box containing 12 sticks of colored chalk that Mr. Hutchins had ordered special from Denver and never been able to sell. Lily's eyes grew wider with each item Sarah revealed. When the colored chalk appeared, she actually gasped, a small sound of wonder that she quickly tried to stifle. "These are all for you," Sarah said, "for as long as you want them." "All of them," Lily whispered. "Every single one." For a long moment, Lily just stared at the supplies as if they might disappear if she blinked. Then, with the careful reverence of someone handling precious jewels, she reached out and picked up one of the pencils. She tested its weight, examined the tip, even smelled the cedar wood. "I've never had a real pencil before," she admitted quietly. "Papa always said they were too expensive for just drawing." Sarah had to swallow hard before she could respond. "Well, these pencils are specifically for drawing. That's their only job." Lily selected a piece of the cream-colored paper and began to draw. But instead of the family scene she'd been creating with charcoal on scraps, this time she drew something different. She started with a house, not unlike the ones in her previous drawings, but more detailed. She added windows with curtains, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs, a garden with neat rows of vegetables. Sarah watched, fascinated, as Lily's small hand moved with surprising confidence across the paper. Despite her young age and limited materials up until now, the child had real talent. The proportions were right, the perspective solid. She had an innate understanding of how to make a flat surface look three-dimensional. "That's a beautiful house," Sarah commented when Lily paused to examine her work. "It's your house," Lily said simply. Sarah blinked in surprise. "My house? How do you know what my house looks like?" "I asked Mrs. Patterson to describe it," Lily said, not looking up from her drawing. "She said it was white with blue shutters and a garden where you grow vegetables and flowers together. She said it looked like a place where happy people live." The simple statement hit Sarah like a gentle blow to the chest. Mrs. Patterson had described their house as a place where happy people live. Sarah wondered if that was still true, if happiness could survive the loss of dreams they'd carried for so long. "Would you like to see it sometime?" Sarah asked carefully. "The real house, I mean." Lily's hand stilled on the paper. "Could I?" "Of course. Maybe you could come have lunch with us today if you'd like." For the first time since Sarah had met her, Lily smiled. It was a small, tentative thing, but it transformed her entire face. Sarah caught a glimpse of who this child might be when she wasn't carrying the weight of tragedy. Bright, curious, maybe even mischievous. "I would like that," Lily said. "But what if I don't know how to act in a real house? What if I do something wrong?" Sarah's heart ached at the question. "Lily, sweetheart, there's no wrong way to be in our house. It's not a fancy place with rules about where you can sit or what you can touch. It's just a home." Lily considered this, then picked up one of the colored chalk sticks, yellow like sunshine. She began adding details to her drawing. Yellow flowers in the garden, golden light coming through the windows, a yellow sun in the sky above the house. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said without looking up from her work. "Yes? In my old house before what happened, my mama used to let me help in the kitchen sometimes. I can peel potatoes and snap green beans. I'm very careful with knives." "I would love help in the kitchen," Sarah said, meaning it completely. "Cooking is always more fun with company." Lily added more details to her drawing, a swing hanging from the tree beside the house, curtains in the windows, even a small figure that might have been a person standing in the garden. "Mrs. Mitchell? You can call me Sarah if you'd like." "Sarah," Lily repeated as if testing how it felt in her mouth. "Is Mr. Mitchell? Is he nice? Really nice? Not just pretend nice?" The question revealed so much about what this child had experienced. Enough to know the difference between genuine kindness and politeness that masked indifference or worse. "He's the nicest man I've ever known," Sarah said honestly. "He's gentle and patient and funny. He talks to our cattle like they're people, and he always remembers to bring me wildflowers when he comes back from checking the fences. Yesterday, when we were talking to you, he sat on the floor because he thought it might make you feel more comfortable." "He did do that," Lily agreed thoughtfully. Most grown-ups don't sit on the floor. James isn't like most grown-ups. Neither am I, probably. Lily looked up from her drawing with curiosity. What makes you different? Sarah thought about how to answer that. Well, I think most adults forget what it was like to be children. They forget how big and scary the world can seem, how important little things can be. James and I try to remember. Is that why you became a teacher? Partly, but mostly I became a teacher because I love children. I love the way they see the world, the questions they ask, the way they can find magic in ordinary things. Lily was quiet for a moment, adding more yellow touches to her drawing. Do you have children of your own? The question Sarah had been dreading. She could lie, deflect, change the subject. But looking at this perceptive child who had already learned that the world could be cruel and unpredictable, Sarah decided that honesty was the only acceptable response. No, she said simply. James and I wanted children very much, but we found out yesterday that we can't have babies of our own. Lily looked up sharply, her blue eyes wide. Yesterday? The same day you met me? Yes. That must have made you very sad. It did. It still does. Lily studied Sarah's face with the intensity she usually reserved for her drawings. But you're still being nice to me, even though you're sad. Being sad doesn't mean you stop caring about other people, Sarah said. And meeting you, well, it's been the best part of a very difficult day. Lily picked up a blue piece of chalk and began adding sky to her drawing. In my other family, when sad things happened, we all helped each other feel better. Mama said that's what families do. Your mama was very wise. She was. Lily added white chalk clouds to the blue sky. Sarah? Yes. When we go to your house today, could I maybe draw a picture of it from the inside too? So I can remember what it looks like. Of course. You can draw anything you want. Lily nodded and returned to her artwork, but Sarah noticed that she was now humming very quietly under her breath. The first time Sarah had heard her make any sound that wasn't words. It was a tiny sign of contentment, of a mind beginning to settle and feel safe. When Lily finished her drawing, she held it up for Sarah to see. The house was complete now, surrounded by gardens and sunshine, with the swing moving gently in an implied breeze. But she'd added one more detail that made Sarah's breath catch. Two figures standing in the garden, and between them, much smaller, a third figure with yellow hair. Is that? Sarah began. It's what it might look like, Lily said quietly, if I came to live with you. Just to see. Sarah felt tears threatening and had to blink them back. It looks perfect, she managed. Are you ready to go see the real one? Lily asked, carefully rolling up her drawing. I think so, Sarah said. Are you? Lily nodded, gathering her new art supplies with the careful attention of someone who understood their value. As they prepared to leave the church, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer just about helping a displaced child. This was about the possibility of becoming a family. The three of them walking toward a future none of them had planned, but all of them desperately needed. The wagon ride to the Mitchell Ranch passed in comfortable silence, with Lily clutching her rolled-up drawing and new art supplies as if they were lifelines to a safer world. Sarah had wrapped the child in her own shawl against the cool September morning, and she noticed how Lily kept touching the soft wool, as if fine fabric was something she'd forgotten existed. As they crested the hill that revealed the Mitchell homestead spread out below them, Sarah heard Lily's sharp intake of breath. The house stood exactly as she'd drawn it. White clapboard with blue shutters, surrounded by the garden where Sarah grew vegetables and flowers in companionable rows. The big oak tree dominated the front yard, its branches thick enough to support the swing that James had promised to hang. It looks just like my picture, Lily whispered, wonder evident in her voice. You drew it perfectly, James said, pulling the wagon to a stop near the front porch. Better than perfectly, actually. You made it look like a place where people belong. Lily studied his face as if trying to determine whether he was being honest or just kind. Sarah was learning that this child had developed an almost uncanny ability to read adult intentions, probably out of necessity. Would you like to see inside? Sarah asked, climbing down from the wagon and turning to help Lily. But Lily surprised her by scrambling down on her own. then standing perfectly still in the front yard, simply looking at everything. Her gaze moved from the house to the garden to the barn in the distance, where James's cattle were grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. "It's quiet," she said finally. "Does that bother you?" Sarah asked, suddenly worried that a child accustomed to the bustle of a larger family might find their remote ranch too isolated. "No," Lily said quickly. "It's good quiet, safe quiet." She paused, then added in a smaller voice, "The quiet after the bad thing happened was different. It was scary quiet." Sarah and James exchanged a look over Lily's head. In those few words, the child had revealed more about her trauma than hours of questioning might have uncovered. The silence that followed violence was indeed different from the peace that came with safety. "Come on," James said gently. "Let's go inside and I'll show you where we keep the cookies." "You have cookies?" Lily asked. And for the first time since they'd met her, she sounded like an ordinary 7-year-old. "Sarah makes the best oatmeal cookies in Wyoming territory," James said proudly. "Sometimes I sneak extra ones when she's not looking." "I always know when you do that," Sarah laughed. "You leave crumbs on your shirt." "Those could be anyone's crumbs," James protested with mock seriousness. Lily actually giggled, a sound so unexpected and delightful that both adults stopped walking just to hear it better. The interior of the house seemed to cast the same spell over Lily that the exterior had. She moved through the rooms slowly, taking in every detail: the braided rugs on the polished wooden floors, the quilts draped over chairs, the photographs on the mantelpiece, the bookshelf filled with volumes that James and Sarah had collected over the years. "You have so many books," Lily said, running her finger along the spines. "Do you like to read?" Sarah asked. "I can read some words. Mama was teaching me, but then—" She trailed off, but didn't seem to sink into sadness the way she had when mentioning her family before. "We could read together sometime if you'd like," Sarah offered. "I have some books that I think you might enjoy." Lily nodded enthusiastically, then seemed to remember something. "Could I draw the inside of your house now? Like I said I wanted to?" "Of course. Where would you like to sit?" Lily looked around the main room, considering her options, then pointed to a spot near the large window that faced the garden. "There, so I can see outside too." Sarah helped her set up her art supplies on a small table by the window, and Lily immediately set to work with the focused intensity that seemed to characterize all her artistic endeavors. But this time, instead of starting with a house or family figures, she began with something Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "What are you drawing?" Sarah asked, settling into a nearby chair with some mending. "The feeling," Lily said matter-of-factly, as if this were the most normal thing in the world to draw. "What feeling?" Lily paused in her work to consider the question. "The feeling of being inside a safe place. It has a shape, but it's hard to explain." James, who had been puttering around in the kitchen preparing lunch, came over to see what had captured their attention. When he saw Lily's emerging drawing, his eyebrows rose in surprise. What Lily was creating wasn't realistic in the traditional sense. It was more abstract, more emotional. She'd drawn the room but emphasized certain elements: the warm light coming through the windows, the way the furniture seemed to embrace rather than simply occupy space, the books that suggested stories and knowledge and comfort. Even more remarkably, she'd somehow managed to convey a sense of safety and peace through her use of gentle curves and soft shading. "That's incredible," James said quietly. "How did you learn to draw feelings?" "I don't know," Lily said with a small shrug. "I just always could. Mama said I saw things differently than other people." "Your mama was right," Sarah said. "This is a very special gift you have." Lily continued working, adding details that transformed the simple room into something that looked almost magical, a sanctuary where hurt people could heal and lonely people could find belonging. "Lily," James said, settling into a chair across from her, "I have an idea. What would you think about staying here for a few days, just to see how it feels?" Lily's hand stilled on the paper. "Really? I could stay here?" "If you want to," Sarah said carefully. "We have a spare room upstairs that we could fix up for you. It has a big window that faces the mountains, and there's a desk where you could do your drawing." What about Mrs. Patterson? She's been taking care of me. Mrs. Patterson thinks it's a wonderful idea, James said. We talked to her this morning. She's been worried about you sleeping in that little room at the church. She thinks you need a real home, even if it's just temporary. Lily set down her pencil and looked from Sarah to James and back again. Would I have to call you Mama and Papa? The question was asked so seriously, with such careful consideration, that Sarah felt her heart clench. You can call us whatever feels right to you, she said. Sarah and James are fine. Or Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, if that's more comfortable. There's no pressure to call us anything special unless you want to. What if I wanted to, later? Would that be all right? That would be more than all right, James said, his voice slightly rough. That would be wonderful. Lily nodded thoughtfully, then returned to her drawing. But something had changed in her posture. She seemed more relaxed, more settled, as if a decision had been made even though she hadn't announced it yet. For the next hour they worked in companionable silence. Lily drawing, Sarah mending, James reading aloud from the newspaper and commenting on the more ridiculous headlines in a way that made Lily smile. It felt, Sarah realized, like family. When Lily finally finished her drawing, she held it up for them to see. It's done, she announced. The drawing was remarkable. She'd captured not just the physical space of their main room, but something intangible about what it felt like to be there. The warmth, the peace, the sense of belonging that Sarah herself had worked years to create. But what made Sarah's breath catch was what Lily had added in the final moments. In the comfortable chairs around the room, she'd drawn 3 figures, 2 adults and 1 child, all reading books, all clearly content to simply be in each other's presence. Is that us? Sarah asked softly. It's what it could look like, Lily said, using the same phrase she'd used about the outside of the house. If I stayed, James leaned forward in his chair. Is that what you'd like? To stay? Lily looked down at her drawing, then up at the 2 people who had shown her more kindness in 2 days than she'd experienced since losing her family. I think so, she said quietly, if you really want me. We want you, Sarah said, the words coming out more fervently than she'd intended. We want you very much. Even though I'm not really yours? Even though I can't replace the babies you wanted to have? The question revealed how much this wise child had understood about their situation, how carefully she'd been listening and thinking about what she'd learned. Lily, James said gently, families aren't just about who shares your blood. They're about who shares your heart, and you've been sharing our hearts since the moment we met you. Lily considered this, her blue eyes serious. My first family will always be in my heart too. Of course they will, Sarah said, and we'd never want that to change. They're part of who you are, and we love who you are. For a long moment, Lily simply sat quietly, looking at her drawing. Then she carefully tore a small piece of paper from her art supplies and began sketching something quickly. Just a few lines, but clearly deliberate. When she finished, she held up a simple drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands with a house in the background and a sun shining overhead. At the bottom, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, she had written, My New Family. She handed the drawing to Sarah. This is for you to keep, she said, so you remember that I chose you too. Sarah took the drawing with trembling hands, tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. Thank you, she whispered. I'll treasure this forever. Does this mean I can really stay? Lily asked. For as long as you want, James said. Forever, if that's what you choose. Lily smiled then, not the tentative, careful expression she'd been wearing, but a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. I choose forever, she said simply. As the 3 of them sat in the golden afternoon light streaming through the window, surrounded by Lily's drawings that had somehow managed to capture not just how things looked, but how they felt, Sarah realized that their family was complete, not in the way they'd originally imagined, but in a way that was perhaps even more perfect because it had been chosen by all of them, freely and with full hearts. The little girl who drew feelings had drawn them all into a new life, and it was more beautiful than anything Sarah could have imagined. 3 weeks had passed since Lily Henderson had come to stay with the Mitchells, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Every morning, Lily would wake before dawn and pad downstairs in her bare feet to find Sarah already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Without being asked, the little girl would set the table and help with small tasks, humming softly under her breath, a sound that had become Sarah's favorite part of each day. James had hung the promised swing from the oak tree, and in the evenings the three of them would sit on the front porch while Lily drew in one of the sketchbooks Sarah had bought her. Her art had evolved from the desperate, repetitive family scenes she'd created in the church to more varied works. Landscapes of their ranch, portraits of their cattle, detailed drawings of wildflowers she'd found in the meadows. But most remarkably, she'd begun drawing pictures of the future. Houses with additions, gardens expanded to include fruit trees, even sketches of what appeared to be other children playing in their yard. When Sarah had asked about these mysterious other children, Lily had simply said, "Sometimes families grow." It was a peaceful existence, almost too good to be true, which Sarah was learning meant it probably was. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Sheriff Coleman rode up to their gate, his expression grim. Sarah's heart immediately clenched. In her experience, law enforcement visits rarely brought good news. "Morning, Sarah James," the sheriff said, dismounting from his horse with the slow deliberation of a man carrying unwelcome news. "Mind if I come in for a moment?" Lily, who had been feeding scraps to the chickens, immediately moved closer to Sarah, her small hand slipping into Sarah's larger one. The child's instincts for potential danger had remained sharp despite 3 weeks of safety. "Of course," James said, though his voice carried an edge of wariness. "Coffee? That'd be appreciated." They settled around the kitchen table, Lily sitting close enough to Sarah that their chairs were touching. Sheriff Coleman accepted his coffee gratefully, but didn't drink it immediately, instead turning his hat nervously in his hands. "I'm afraid I've got some complications regarding young Lily here," he said finally. Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What kind of complications?" "Well, it seems word has gotten out about the arrangement you folks have made. Most people think it's a fine thing. Lord knows the child needed a good home. But there's been some official interest." "Official interest?" James repeated. "Territorial authorities. Seems there's questions about the legality of what's happening here. Technically, Lily is still a ward of the state until proper adoption proceedings are completed, and those can take months, maybe longer." Sarah's grip tightened on Lily's hand. "What does that mean?" Sheriff Coleman sighed heavily. "It means there's a possibility she could be removed from your care and placed in an official orphanage until the paperwork is sorted out. There's one in Cheyenne that handles territorial wards." The words hit the kitchen like a physical blow. Lily went very still beside Sarah, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. The little girl who had finally begun to relax, to laugh, to hope again, was suddenly faced with the possibility of another abandonment. "No," Sarah said flatly, "that's not happening." "Sarah, I understand how you feel, but—" "No, you don't understand," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "You don't understand what this child has been through, what she's finally starting to heal from. You don't understand that removing her from a loving home to put her in an institution while bureaucrats shuffle papers would be cruel beyond measure." Lily spoke up for the first time, her voice very small. "Would I have to go away?" Sheriff Coleman looked down at the child, his weathered face softening. "I'm hoping it won't come to that, little one. But I wanted to warn your folks so they could prepare." "Prepare how?" James asked. "Get the adoption paperwork started officially. And fast. Judge Morrison is due through town next month for circuit court. If we can get everything properly filed and have him approve the adoption, then there's nothing the territorial authorities can do." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "What do we need to do?" "Affidavits from respected community members vouching for your character and suitability as parents. Financial records proving you can support a child, and—" He hesitated. "And what?" "And you'll need to convince the judge that this adoption is in Lily's best interest, not just your own." Lily looked up at Sarah with those two wise blue eyes. "What if they say I can't stay?" Sarah knelt beside Lily's chair, taking the child's face gently in her hands. "Then we'll fight," she said firmly. "We'll fight with everything we have, because you belong here with us. Promise?" I promise. But even as Sarah made the vow, she felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. They lived on the frontier, where official processes moved slowly and bureaucratic decisions often favored institutions over individuals. What if their love wasn't enough? What if legal technicalities mattered more than what was best for a traumatized child? Over the following days, the Mitchells threw themselves into gathering the required documentation. Sarah visited every family in Millbrook Valley, collecting glowing testimonials about her teaching abilities and James's character. Mrs. Patterson wrote a particularly moving letter about Lily's transformation from a silent, traumatized child to a bright, engaged little girl who was clearly thriving in their care. Dr. Harrison provided medical records showing that Lily was healthy and well cared for. Even gruff Mr. Hutchins at the general store wrote a brief note attesting to James's reliability and Sarah's dedication to the community. But it was Lily herself who provided the most compelling evidence. During this period of uncertainty, instead of retreating into the protective shell she'd worn when they first met her, she seemed to grow stronger, more determined to fight for the family she'd chosen. She created a portfolio of drawings that told the story of her healing, pictures showing her progression from the dark, chaotic sketches she'd made in the church to the bright, hopeful scenes she now drew of life on the ranch. She included the family drawings she'd created, but also landscapes that showed how she saw their home, as a place of beauty, security, and infinite possibility. Most remarkably, she wrote a letter. Her penmanship was still childish, and Sarah had to help with some of the spelling, but the words were entirely her own. To the judge, my name is Lily Henderson. I am 7 years old. My first family died, and I was very sad. Then I met Sarah and James Mitchell, and they are kind to me. They give me art supplies and help me learn to read better. James hung a swing on the tree for me, and Sarah teaches me to cook. They never make me afraid. I want to be their daughter, and they want to be my parents. Please let us be a family. Love, Lily Mitchell. I practice writing that name. The addition of Mitchell to her signature made both Sarah and James tear up. But it was the note in parentheses that broke their hearts completely. This child was already practicing being their daughter, already claiming their name as her own. As the date for Judge Morrison's arrival approached, word of the situation spread throughout the community. To Sarah's surprise, the response was overwhelmingly supportive. Neighbors who had previously been mere acquaintances stopped by with offers of help. Even people who rarely attended church showed up at Sunday service to add their voices to the prayers being said for the Mitchell family. But support wasn't universal. Some voices in the community questioned whether a couple who couldn't have children of their own were truly suited to raise someone else's child. Others wondered if taking in an orphan was somehow playing God or interfering with divine will. These whispers reached Lily's ears, despite Sarah and James's efforts to shield her from gossip. One afternoon, Sarah found the little girl sitting by her bedroom window, staring out at the mountains with an expression of deep concentration. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, settling beside her on the window seat. "Some people don't think I should stay here," Lily said quietly. Sarah's heart clenched. "Some people have opinions about things they don't understand. Mrs. Cartwright at the store said that children belong with their own kind, and that I should go live with other orphans." Sarah felt a surge of anger at the thoughtless cruelty of adults who would say such things within a child's hearing. "Mrs. Cartwright is wrong," she said firmly. "You belong wherever you're loved and safe and happy. That's here, with us." Lily was quiet for a moment, then said, "I drew something for the judge." She reached under her pillow and pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times it was soft as fabric. When she opened it, Sarah saw the most powerful drawing Lily had ever created. It showed 3 figures, clearly Sarah, James, and Lily. But they weren't just standing together. They were connected by visible threads of light that flowed between them, creating a web of connection that seemed to glow on the paper. Above them, sketched very lightly, were the shadowy figures of Lily's original family, but instead of looking sad or lost, they appeared to be blessing the new arrangement. At the bottom in Lily's careful printing were the words, "This is what love looks like." "Lily," Sarah breathed, "this is incredible. Do you think the judge will understand it? If he has any heart at all, he will." The night before Judge Morrison's arrival, The three of them sat on the front porch as they had every evening for weeks. But tonight felt different, heavier with possibility and fear. Lily had been unusually quiet during dinner, picking at her food and glancing repeatedly at Sarah and James as if trying to memorize their faces. "Are you scared?" James asked gently. Lily nodded. "What if he says no?" "Then we appeal to a higher court," Sarah said. "And if that doesn't work, we'll find another way. We'll move to a different territory if we have to. We won't give up on you, Lily. Ever. But what if I'm too much trouble? What if it would be easier for you to just let me go?" The question revealed the deepest fear of every child who had been abandoned. That love was conditional, that they could become burdensome enough to be cast aside again. James got up from his chair and knelt in front of Lily's swing, taking her small hands in his large ones. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "You are not trouble. You are not a burden. You are our daughter, and nothing any judge says will change that. Papers might make it official, but our hearts made it real weeks ago." "Really?" "Really," Sarah confirmed. "No matter what happens tomorrow, you are ours and we are yours. That's not something any court can take away." Lily nodded, but Sarah could see the worry still lingering in her eyes. As they prepared for bed, Sarah made a decision. "Lily, would you like to sleep in our room tonight, just so you don't have to be alone with your worries?" Lily's face lit up with relief. "Could I?" "Of course." That night, as Lily slept peacefully between them on the big bed, Sarah and James lay awake holding hands across their sleeping daughter, each lost in their own prayers and fears. Tomorrow would determine whether their family remained intact or was torn apart by legal technicalities and bureaucratic indifference. But whatever happened, Sarah knew that these weeks with Lily had changed them forever. They had learned that families could be born from choice as well as blood, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the greatest miracles came disguised as the greatest challenges. Tomorrow they would find out if the law agreed. Judge Morrison was not what Sarah had expected. Instead of the stern, imposing figure she'd imagined, he was a slight man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle manner that immediately put everyone at ease. He had arrived in Millbrook Valley the night before and spent the morning reviewing the case files in Pastor William's study, which was serving as a temporary courtroom. Now, as Sarah, James, and Lily sat in the front pew of the church that had been hastily converted for legal proceedings, Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind them, nearly half the town had gathered to show their support, their presence a silent testament to how much this little family had come to mean to the community. "This is an unusual case," Judge Morrison began, settling his spectacles more firmly on his nose. "Adoption proceedings typically take place in official territorial courts, with extensive background investigations and waiting periods. However, given the remote nature of this location and the urgent circumstances surrounding Miss Henderson's situation, I've been authorized to make a decision today." He looked down at the papers spread before him, then up at the three people whose future hung in the balance. "I've reviewed the testimonials from community members, all of which speak glowingly of Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell's character and capabilities. Dr. Harrison's medical reports show that Lily has not only maintained her health, but has actually gained weight and appears to be thriving in their care. The financial records demonstrate that the Mitchells are more than capable of supporting a child." Sarah felt a flutter of hope, but the judge's neutral tone made it impossible to guess which way he was leaning. "However," Judge Morrison continued, and Sarah's heart sank, "I must also consider whether this arrangement truly serves the child's best interests or whether it merely fulfills the adult's desire for parenthood." "Your Honor," Sarah said, starting to rise from her seat. The judge held up a gentle hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your eagerness to speak, but I'd like to hear from Lily first, if she's willing." All eyes turned to the little girl who had been sitting quietly between her potential parents, her portfolio of drawings clutched in her lap. Lily looked up at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm willing," Lily said, her voice small but clear. "Lily, do you understand what adoption means?" Judge Morrison asked kindly. "It means Sarah and James would legally be my parents forever, and I would legally be their daughter forever." "And is that what you want?" "Yes, sir." "Can you tell me why?" Lily was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. Then she stood up, still holding her portfolio. When my first family died, I thought love was gone forever, she said, her young voice carrying in wisdom that silenced the entire room. I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to have a family anymore. But then I met Sarah and James, and they showed me that love doesn't run out. There's always room for more. She opened her portfolio and carefully selected the drawing she'd shown Sarah, the one with the threads of light connecting the three figures. This is what I drew for you, Judge Morrison. It shows how love works in families. The love from my first family didn't disappear when they went to heaven. It's still here in my heart. But now there's new love too, from Sarah and James, and the love I give them. It all connects together. Judge Morrison accepted the drawing, studying it with the same serious attention he'd given the legal documents. Sarah watched his expression soften as he took in the remarkable artwork. The way Lily had captured not just physical likenesses, but the emotional bonds that connected them. This is extraordinary work for someone your age, he said quietly. Art is how I talk when words aren't enough, Lily explained. And Sarah bought me real art supplies so I could talk better. I see. And how do you feel about living with the Mitchells? Safe, Lily said immediately. Happy, like I belong somewhere again. James hung a swing for me even though I didn't ask for one. Sarah teaches me new words when we read together. They listen when I talk about my first family instead of telling me to forget about them. Judge Morrison nodded thoughtfully, then looked at Sarah and James. Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell, would you please approach? They stood together, James's hand finding Sarah's as they stepped forward. I must ask you directly, why do you want to adopt Lily? Be honest. Sarah looked down at the little girl who had transformed their lives, then back at the judge. Your Honor, 3 weeks ago, my husband and I learned that we would never have biological children. We thought our dream of being parents was over, but Lily didn't just give us the chance to be parents. She taught us that family isn't about biology. It's about choice, commitment, and love. We want to adopt Lily because she's already our daughter in every way that matters, James added. Not because she fills a void in our lives, but because she completes our family. Because we can't imagine our future without her in it. And if difficulties arise, if she struggles with her trauma, or if raising her proves more challenging than you anticipate, then we'll face those challenges together, Sarah said without hesitation. That's what families do. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between the legal documents and Lily's drawing. The silence stretched until Sarah wondered if her heartbeat was audible to the entire congregation. Finally, the judge removed his spectacles and cleaned them carefully before speaking. In my 30 years on the bench, I've presided over hundreds of adoption cases. I've seen arrangements made for convenience, for financial gain, for social standing. But I've rarely seen anything as clear-cut as this. He stood, holding Lily's drawing up so the entire room could see it. This child has shown me something remarkable. Not just artistic talent, but emotional intelligence and wisdom far beyond her years. She understands love not as something finite that must be hoarded, but as something that grows when shared. And she has chosen her family with the same deliberation that her family has chosen her. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as hope began to bloom in her chest. Therefore, it is my judgment that the adoption of Lily Henderson by James and Sarah Mitchell is not only legal, but absolutely in the best interests of all parties involved. The adoption is hereby approved and will be final upon the signing of these documents. The church erupted in cheers and applause. Lily launched herself into Sarah's arms, and James wrapped both of them in a fierce embrace as tears of joy streamed down all their faces. We're really a family now, Lily whispered against Sarah's neck. We're really a family now, Sarah confirmed, forever and always. As they signed the papers that would make their family official, Lily carefully tore a fresh piece of paper from her sketchbook and began drawing quickly. When she finished, she handed the new drawing to Judge Morrison. It showed the same three figures as before, but now they were surrounded by the shadowy outlines of an entire community. Faces that clearly represented the people of Millbrook Valley who had supported them through this process. At the top, she had written in her careful printing, "Sometimes it takes a whole town to make a family." Judge Morrison smiled as he accepted this final artwork. Miss Mitchell, and yes, that is now legally your name. You are quite remarkable. I predict great things in your future. That evening, as they sat on their front porch swing, all three of them squeezed together now, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Lily pulled out yet another drawing. I made one more, she said, showing them a picture of their house with an addition on the side. For when our family gets bigger? Bigger? James asked with amusement. Sometimes families grow, Lily said, echoing what she'd told them weeks earlier. And I think ours might. Sarah and James exchanged a look over Lily's head. They had learned not to question this child's instincts about the future. We'll see, Sarah said, hugging their daughter closer. We have plenty of time to figure out what comes next. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lily fell asleep between her parents, her sketchbook still open in her lap to a drawing of three hearts connected by threads of light. The Mitchell family was complete, born not from biology but from choice, sealed not just by legal documents but by love that had proven stronger than loss, deeper than grief, and more enduring than any challenge the frontier could present. In the morning, Lily would wake up as Lily Mitchell, officially and forever. But tonight, she was simply a little girl who had found her way home. And so, in the heart of Wyoming territory, where the wind whispered stories across endless plains and the mountains stood as eternal witnesses to human hope and heartbreak, three broken souls found each other and became whole. The Mitchell family story didn't end with Judge Morrison's approval. It began there. In the years that followed, Lily's prediction about their family growing proved remarkably accurate. They took in two more orphan children, a pair of siblings whose parents had been lost to a mining accident. Then came a baby abandoned at the church steps during a harsh winter. Each addition to their family was drawn there by the same invisible threads of love that Lily had captured so perfectly in her drawings. Lily's artistic gifts only grew stronger with time. By age 16, she was selling her paintings to visitors from back east who marveled at her ability to capture not just the rugged beauty of the frontier, but the indomitable spirit of the people who called it home. Her most famous work, displayed in the territorial capital, was a painting of 5 children of different ages and backgrounds sitting around a kitchen table, all drawing pictures while 2 adults looked on with expressions of pure contentment. The title, written in her own hand, read simply, "Sometimes families choose each other." Sarah never did have biological children, but she often said that motherhood had found her in exactly the way it was meant to. She continued teaching at the Millbrook Valley School, but her classroom expanded to include not just the children of the community, but any young person who needed guidance, education, or simply a place to belong. James became known throughout the territory not just as a successful rancher, but as a man who never turned away a child in need. Travelers would often mention the Mitchell Ranch as a place where hope lived, where broken things could be mended, and where love multiplied rather than divided when shared. But perhaps the most remarkable testament to their story was what happened to the original church room, where Lily had first been brought after her family's tragedy. Mrs. Patterson convinced the congregation to convert it into a permanent space for children who were waiting for families or healing from trauma. Above the door, they hung Lily's very first drawing, the one showing her original family, with the words "Love Never Dies" written below it in careful script. The Mitchell family story became legend in Wyoming territory, passed down through generations as proof that families come in all forms, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we open our hearts to unexpected possibilities. You see, this wasn't just a story about adoption. It was a story about recognition, about seeing the love that already exists and having the courage to claim it, about understanding that family isn't defined by blood or biology, but by choice, commitment, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of shared experience. In a world that often feels harsh and unforgiving, the Mitchell family reminds us that love is the most powerful force on earth. It can bridge any gap, heal any wound, and create connections that transcend every boundary society tries to impose. Their story proves that home isn't a place you're born into. It's a place you create with the people who see your worth, celebrate your uniqueness, and choose to walk beside you through whatever storms may come. So the next time you see a child who needs belonging, a person who needs acceptance, or a heart that needs healing, Remember Lily's drawing of the threads of light that connect us all. Remember that every family started with someone brave enough to say, "You belong with us." And remember that in the vast wilderness of this world, love always finds a way. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Wild West Stories for more tales of courage, hope, and the unbreakable human spirit. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that family is something you choose, and love is something that grows when you give it away. What's your favorite part of James, Sarah, and Lily's journey? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest frontier tales of love, redemption, and second chances. Until next time, remember, in the wild west of life, the greatest adventures happen when we open our hearts to the unexpected. Keep riding toward love, and love will always find you.